By the time I jumped from my truck, half my roof hung from an excavator bucket, and my stepdad was laughing. He thought flattening my $500,000 house would wipe out one deed, one witness, and one inconvenient stepdaughter. What he did not realize was that I make a living spotting title fraud. Every shovel of dirt they moved dug their estate closer to a federal raid. My name is Valerie Brooks, and until this exact moment, I believed my home was my untouchable sanctuary. I had just wrapped up a brutal 10-hour shift at Blue Aster Title Solutions, my eyes burning from staring at fine print, complex deeds, and overlapping mortgage clauses. I was navigating the winding, oak-lined roads of Tennessee, looking forward to nothing more than a quiet evening on my back porch. But before I even crested the final hill leading to my property, I heard it. A guttural, mechanical roar echoing through the valley. It was the sound of heavy diesel engines, the screech of tearing metal, and the heavy rhythmic thud of structural collapse. When my truck cleared the tree line, I slammed on the brakes so hard the seatbelt bruised my collarbone. The dust was a thick, choking cloud of pulverized mortar and shattered drywall. Through the haze, I saw the bright yellow arm of a massive excavator swinging backward. It paused, gears grinding, before plunging its steel teeth directly into the roof of my $500,000 stone house. The beautiful wraparound porch I had spent months restoring was gone, reduced to splintered lumber and twisted nails. The bay windows of my living room had exploded inward, showering the lawn with jagged diamonds of glass. As I watched, paralyzed, the excavator bucket swung again, ripping through the side of my house and dragging my entire kitchen out into the open air. Custom oak cabinets, copper plumbing, and imported tile were crushed into kindling and hauled away like garbage by a waiting dump truck. I threw my vehicle into park and stumbled out, the gravel crunching under my boots. The air smelled of ruptured gas lines, ancient dust, and raw dirt. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drop to my knees and wail. But the sound that hit my ears next froze the breath in my lungs. It was laughter. A deep, booming, utterly satisfied belly laugh. Standing on the manicured grass just safely out of the debris zone was my stepdad, Wade Mercer. He was wearing his signature tailored blazer over a crisp shirt, his hands resting on his hips as he admired the destruction like a proud general surveying a conquered battlefield. He was not looking at the tragedy of a destroyed home. He was watching a theatrical performance he had directed. A few feet away from him stood my own mother, Celeste. She was not crying. She was not calling the police. She had her smartphone raised, the screen glowing as she recorded the chaotic scene, and then, as I staggered forward, she turned the camera toward me. She was filming my devastation, capturing the exact moment my heart broke, likely to play it back later over martinis with her country club friends to prove how hysterical I could be. "Well, look who decided to show up," a voice sneered from my left. Travis Mercer, Wade's 29-year-old golden boy, stepped out from behind a pristine white pickup truck. He was smirking, holding a large, glossy cylinder. He popped the cap off and unrolled a massive architectural rendering, holding it up so I could see it clearly over the dust and chaos. "Do you like it, Val?" Travis shouted over the idle roar of the machinery. "We are calling it the Mercer Lakeview VIP entrance, right where your pathetic little kitchen used to be. We are putting in a magnificent cobblestone driveway. And over there, where your bedroom is currently getting flattened, we are building a row of luxury guest cottages for the estate." I stared at him, my mind unable to process the sheer audacity. "What are you doing?" I choked out, my voice barely a whisper against the industrial noise. "This is my house. I own this land." Wade strolled over, his leather shoes stepping carelessly over a piece of my shattered front door. His smile was razor-thin and devoid of any human warmth. "Not anymore, sweetheart," he declared, projecting his voice with that practiced patriarchal authority he used to bully local politicians and contractors alike. "The county declared this structure condemned just this morning. Severe foundation rot, structural instability. It was a death trap. Valerie, we actually did you a favor." And since the land sits right on the edge of the Mercer family estate, the paperwork has already been processed to bring this parcel back into the family fold, where it belongs. Condemned? I fired back, the shock slowly morphing into a cold, dark fury. I had a full inspection done 6 months ago. The foundation is solid bedrock. You cannot just condemn a house and bulldoze it in one afternoon without notice. My mother finally lowered her phone, her expression a mask of elegant disdain. She adjusted her designer sunglasses and sighed, acting as if my anger was just another exhausting, childish tantrum. "Oh, Valerie, please stop being so dramatic," Celeste said smoothly, her tone dripping with absolute condescension. "You should be thanking Wade. He neatly handled an old, depreciating property for you. What does a single woman living alone need with so much space anyway? It was selfish of you to hoard this plot when Travis is trying to build a future for the family business. We are expanding the wedding venue. This is about legacy." Legacy. That was the magic word in the Mercer household. Everything was justified by it. Theft, manipulation, cruelty, all washed clean under the guise of family legacy. But as I stood there, watching a lifetime of savings and a home I loved being ground into dust, the sheer impossibility of their claims finally broke through the emotional fog. I am a senior title risk analyst. My entire career, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, is built on hunting down overlapping mortgages, forged notary stamps, transfer fraud, and fake shell companies. I know the legal velocity of property condemnation in this state. I know the exact bureaucratic friction required to transfer a deed or dissolve a property line. It does not happen in a single morning. It does not happen without certified letters, public hearings, secondary inspections, and a mountain of red tape. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, the weeping, heartbroken daughter died. The corporate risk analyst woke up. I opened my eyes and looked past Wade's arrogant face. I looked past Travis and his stupid glossy poster. I scanned the perimeter of the construction site until I spotted it. Taped to a wooden stake near the temporary fencing was a neon orange permit notice. I walked past my family, ignoring their taunts, and stopped inches from the stake. My eyes darted across the printed text. The county classification code was a 9-digit format. Our county had switched to a 12-digit alphanumeric system 4 years ago. The phrasing of the condemnation clause used archaic legal boilerplate that had been struck down by the state Supreme Court last decade. But the most glaring mistake was the seal at the bottom. It was a digital stamp, slightly pixelated around the edges, printed from a low-resolution image file, not the embossed, ink-stamped seal of the county clerk. It was a forgery, a blatant, incredibly sloppy forgery. "Do not bother reading it, Valerie," Wade called out, mistaking my silence for defeat. "It is all ironclad, approved by the highest offices in the district. You can cry all you want, but you are officially off this land by sunset." I did not scream. I did not throw a punch. I did not fall to the ground and beg them to stop the machines. Instead, a terrifying, absolute calm washed over me. The kind of freezing calm that comes when you realize your enemy has just handed you the exact weapon that will destroy them. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I bypassed the messages and opened the camera application, immediately switching it to video mode. I started with the neon orange permit, zooming in clearly on the fake seal, the incorrect codes, and the forged signature. Then, I panned smoothly to the right, capturing the bright red logo of the demolition company painted on the side of the excavator. I walked slowly toward the dirt road, making sure I got clear, high-definition footage of every single license plate on every truck parked illegally on my property. "What is she doing?" I heard Travis mutter, his voice losing a tiny fraction of its bravado. "Let her," Wade chuckled, loud enough for my microphone to pick up the sound. "Let her document her own eviction. It will be a good memory for her to look back on." I pivoted smoothly on my heels, framing the 3 of them in the center of the shot. I captured the destroyed remains of my home in the background. I captured Celeste, still holding her own phone, her face a portrait of wealthy entitlement, I captured Travis, clutching the evidence of his financial motive in his hands. And finally, I zoomed in on Wade. I captured his smug, victorious, untouchable smile. I wanted that smile on record. I wanted it perfectly preserved in high definition. Because as I hit the stop button and slipped the phone back into my pocket, I knew a truth that Wade Mercer was entirely blind to. He thought flattening my house would wipe out one deed, one witness, and one inconvenient stepdaughter. He thought he was playing a localized game of family dominance. He did not know that every shovel of dirt his illegal demolition crew moved was digging a federal grave for the entire Mercer estate. I did not need to scream at them today. I would just gather my evidence, step back, and let the federal government do the shouting for me tomorrow. I pocketed my phone, the smooth glass burning against my thigh. The air between us settled into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the diesel engine of the excavator idling behind them. "This is simply a family realignment," Wade announced, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored jacket. He spoke with the measured cadence of a corporate chief executive officer delivering a third-quarter earnings report, completely detached from the fact that my life was currently scattered across the grass in splintered heaps. "The assets under the Mercer name must serve the broader vision. We are pivoting toward an upscale boutique experience. Your little parcel of land was structurally impeding the master plan." I stared at him, my jaw tight. A family realignment. He actually used a boardroom buzzword to justify flattening my property. "If Travis needs space for luxury cottages, why did you not use the 12-acre front lawn of the main estate?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. I pointed up the hill, toward the wrought iron gates that marked the boundary of their sprawling mansion. "You have perfectly flat, perfectly buildable acreage right next to the carriage house." "It is already zoned for commercial use," Wade scoffed, waving a hand dismissively in the air. "And ruin the panoramic view from the grand ballroom? Absolutely not. Do you have any idea what brides pay to look out over that pristine valley? If we break ground on the front lawn, we would have heavy machinery and mud tracks ruining the aesthetic for the next 18 months. Our high net worth guests do not pay premium rates to look at a construction site. It would plummet the commercial value of the entire venue." So that was it. My home was sacrificed to protect a view. My mother took a step forward, her expression hardening into that familiar mask of maternal disappointment. She crossed her arms, her diamond rings catching the harsh afternoon sunlight. "You are missing the bigger picture. Valerie, you always do. Travis is building a future. He is creating something that will sustain this family for generations. And what were you doing? You were just sitting on a prime piece of real estate, totally stagnating. You had zero vision for this property. You should be happy it is finally being utilized by someone with actual ambition." I looked at my mother, searching for a single ounce of empathy, a flicker of regret. There was nothing. To her, I was not a daughter losing a sanctuary. I was a stubborn tenant who had finally been evicted from a valuable asset. Travis puffed out his chest, emboldened by Celeste's defense. He tapped the glossy architectural tube against his palm. "Mom is right. You were wasting this spot. Besides, the momentum was already there. I put down non-refundable deposits with the landscape architects 3 weeks ago. I even launched the media package and started taking preliminary bookings from our top-tier investor list last month. The Mercer Lakeview cottages are already a hot commodity." I could not exactly tell them we had to delay the launch, because my stepsister refused to move her ugly stone house. Could I? My mind snagged on his words. 3 weeks ago, last month, he had been selling investments and taking money for a development on land he did not own, while my house was still fully intact and legally registered in my name. That was not just arrogance, that was federal wire fraud. That was soliciting funds using fraudulent collateral. Before I could press him on that catastrophic admission, a heavy-set man in a neon yellow safety vest jogged over. He was sweating profusely, clutching a battered aluminum clipboard against his chest. He looked at me nervously, then turned his attention directly to Wade. "Mr. Mercer, sorry to interrupt," the foreman mumbled, wiping his brow with a grimy rag. The haulers are asking about their second installment. They want to know if the shell company paperwork has been fully paid out yet. They will not haul the debris to the dump until the wire clears their account. Wade's posture stiffened for a fraction of a second. His eyes darted toward me, a flash of genuine annoyance crossing his features. I told you to handle the contractors through the main office, not out here, he snapped in a hushed, venomous tone. Tell them the wire was initiated at 2 o'clock. It will clear. The foreman nodded hastily, flipping a page on his clipboard. As he turned away, the wind caught the top sheet of paper, lifting it just enough for my trained eyes to catch the bold, black text printed at the top of the dispatch slip. Redbriar Holdings. It was not billed to the Mercer estate. It was not billed to Travis's new wedding venue holding company. The demolition was being funded by a completely unknown entity. In my line of work, a shell company paying for an expedited, illegal demolition was the loudest siren in the fraud playbook. Wade cleared his throat, quickly regaining his arrogant composure. He offered me a patronizing smile. Do not worry your head about the logistics. Valerie, the county office was incredibly cooperative. When you have the right connections and you truly know the law, you never have to wait long for approvals. We fast-tracked the condemnation. It is all perfectly legal. He was lying. The county office did not fast-track condemnations for anyone, not even wealthy local businessmen. But more importantly, Wade Mercer was not a man who liked to rush. He was a meticulous planner who preferred to drain his opponents through endless litigation and legal attrition. He loved dragging things through the courts, just to prove he could afford better lawyers. Yet here he was, illegally tearing down my house on a Tuesday afternoon, paying demolition crews through a shadowy holding company, and forging county seals to bypass the standard 60-day waiting periods. I stood there on the ruined grass, the pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapping together in my mind. This was not about Travis getting his luxury cottages. It was never about Travis. Travis was just the loud distraction holding a shiny poster. Wade was terrified of something. He had not destroyed my home to build something new. He had destroyed my home to bury something old. My property was the final jagged piece of land completely surrounded by the Mercer estate, holding a unique, independent easement. If my house remained standing, it required its own tax assessments, its own utility surveys, and most importantly, its own physical appraisals. They were rushing to erase the physical footprint of my home because its mere existence was a massive liability. The Mercers were not just land grabbing, they were frantically sanitizing a crime scene. I did not know exactly what the lie was yet, but I knew it was massive, and I knew it was built on a foundation of rotten financial documents. I understand, I said softly, my voice completely devoid of the hysteria they had been waiting for. Wade blinked, clearly thrown off by my sudden surrender. Excuse me. I said, I understand, I repeated, turning my back on them and walking toward my truck. You needed the land. You took it. Have a good evening. I did not look back. I did not need to. Let them think they had won. Let them pop their champagne and celebrate their family realignment. They had just handed a senior title risk analyst the exact thread needed to unravel their entire empire. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away from the wreckage. I had to get to my computer. I drove blindly for the first 15 miles, my hands gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned a bruised shade of white. The explosive adrenaline that had kept my voice steady and my hands from shaking in front of Wade and Celeste was rapidly burning off, leaving behind a cold, clinical, and sharp focus. I pulled my truck into the empty parking lot of a rundown diner just off the state highway, killed the engine, and forced myself to take slow, measured breaths. My home was gone. The sanctuary where I drank my morning coffee, the porch where I read on Sunday afternoons, all of it was currently being loaded into industrial dump trucks, but the grief would have to wait. Right now, I needed my brain to do exactly what it had been highly trained to do. For the past 8 years, I have worked as a senior title risk analyst at Blue Aster Title Solutions. My entire professional existence revolves around the complex anatomy of commercial and residential real estate transactions. When millions of dollars change hands, corporate banks and private lenders rely on people exactly like me to ensure the dirt actually belongs to the person trying to sell or leverage it. I spend my days hunting down overlapping mortgages, phantom liens, forged notarizations, and sophisticated corporate transfer fraud. I look at dense chains of title that stretch back 100 years just to find the single broken link that could cost a financial institution its entire investment. I know how property moves legally. And more importantly, I know exactly how it does not. Sitting in the quiet cab of my truck, I unlocked my phone and pulled up the high-definition video I had recorded at the demolition site. I paused the playback directly on the neon orange condemnation notice taped to the wooden stake. While standing on my ruined lawn, my brain had automatically flagged the mismatched zoning codes and the fake digital seal. But now, with the luxury of silence, I zoomed in on the bottom right corner of the document. I looked at the notary acknowledgement block. The signature belonged to a man named Richard Vance. The stamp indicated his commission expired in 2 years. I stared at that name until the letters burned into my retinas. I knew that exact name. Exactly 4 months ago, I had flagged a massive commercial loan file at Blue Aster because the notary, Richard Vance, had an invalid commission number. He was currently sitting on our internal industry watch list for his suspected involvement in pushing through fraudulent quitclaim deeds in a neighboring county. Wade had not just used a cheap digital graphic for a county seal. He had utilized a compromised, blacklisted notary to legitimize his forged eviction paperwork. Then, the true physical geography of the Mercer family estate hit me with the force of a physical blow. My property was the absolute center of a geographical donut. I owned the one single parcel of land completely encapsulated by their hundreds of acres of manicured lawns and private driveways. Because of how the original deed was drafted almost 50 years ago, my lot held an independent, irrevocable easement. In the eyes of property law, an easement appurtenant guarantees perpetual access across private roads, and it absolutely cannot simply be waved away by a random county official. It requires a wet ink signature from the dominant estate holder. That was me, without a deed of vacation signed voluntarily by my hand. No title insurance company in the country would ever underwrite the land. And without title insurance, no bank in their right mind would ever approve a multi-million-dollar commercial loan to build a row of luxury guest cottages right over my legal right-of-way. The title would be completely uninsurable. If my house had remained standing, any independent appraiser sent by a commercial lender would drive up the hill, see a perfectly maintained stone house occupying the exact footprint of the proposed project, and instantly flag the entire development as a massive legal liability. The Mercer family would be caught borrowing money against an asset they did not legally control. Wade was not clearing space for a beautiful new wedding venue. He was frantically clearing physical evidence. My mind raced backward, tearing through my memory until I hit a very specific, odd interaction from exactly 5 months ago. Wade had sent me a casual email, attaching a heavily redacted file labeled simply as a release of lien. He had written a folksy, charming message asking his brilliant stepdaughter to translate some dense legal jargon for him. At the time, the clauses he was asking about made 0 sense for a standard mortgage payoff. They read like the mechanics of a complex shell company maneuver designed to wipe a property off a tax ledger and hide the true ownership chain. I remembered feeling a deep, unsettling sense of unease when I read it. I had replied with a vague, entirely non-committal explanation, telling him he should consult his corporate attorney. But before I deleted the email thread, I had quietly downloaded all the original attachments and backed them up to my encrypted personal cloud drive. I had kept them because my professional intuition screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with the paperwork. Now, staring at the frozen image of my destroyed kitchen on my phone screen, I understood the terrifying reality of their situation. Wade, Celeste, and Travis had leveraged themselves so deep into a fraudulent financial structure that my actual physical house had become a mortal threat to their freedom. They had bulldozed my home to make reality match the fraudulent appraisals and fake property surveys they had already submitted to their institutional lenders. If the house was gone, they could claim the land was always vacant. My thumb hovered over my phone keypad. The instinct to dial the emergency dispatch number was overwhelming. My hands shook with the desperate urge to send patrol cars with flashing lights up the Mercer driveway right this second. But I stopped. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap. I looked at the name Richard Vance on my screen again. I thought about the shell company, Redbriar Holdings, printed on the demolition manifest. If I called the local sheriff right now, a couple of county deputies would show up, take some photos of a demolished house, and write up a standard property dispute report. Wade would immediately deploy his army of expensive attorneys, frame the entire demolition as a tragic clerical error made by a third-party contractor, tie me up in endless civil litigation for the next decade, and probably pay a small administrative fine. Local law enforcement was entirely unequipped to unravel a complex commercial real estate fraud ring hidden behind shell corporations and offshore accounts. This was no longer a domestic dispute over a piece of inherited land. This was wire fraud. This was bank fraud. This was the deliberate, calculated destruction of bank collateral. I put my truck in gear and pulled out of the diner parking lot, my tears completely dry. I was not going to the local police station to file a complaint. I was going to my secure backup servers, because this was going to require the federal government. I bypassed my usual routes and drove straight to a 24-hour climate-controlled storage facility on the industrial side of the county. When you work in title risk management, you learn early on never to keep your most critical documents in the same place you sleep. I swiped my access card, walked down the sterile concrete hallway, and rolled up the corrugated metal door to my unit. Inside sat a heavy fireproof safe containing a backup laptop, a portable scanner, and thick binders full of certified hard copies. I sat cross-legged on the cold concrete floor, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and booted up the machine. I pulled up my encrypted cloud drive, syncing it with the physical files I had meticulously maintained over the years. I started with my original property deed and the certified land survey, placing them side by side with the strange digital attachments Wade had emailed me months prior under the guise of asking for casual advice. As I began cross-referencing the parcel identification numbers through a secure portal tied to the National Registry, the floor beneath the Mercer Empire completely fell away. Every document I opened revealed a new, dizzying sinkhole of financial deception. It was not just a single lie, it was a labyrinth of systemic fraud. My specific plot of land had not just been leveraged, it had been weaponized. I traced the parcel number through the county registry database and discovered it was actively listed as collateral on two entirely separate commercial loan applications. The first was a massive commercial development loan intended to fund an upscale venue expansion. The second was a federal disaster relief loan, claiming catastrophic structural damage from a severe storm system that had passed through our region over 8 months ago. They had used the exact same piece of land, but described it in two completely contradictory physical states to two different lending institutions. The loan files contained two distinct sets of property photographs, two vastly different financial valuations, and two sets of forged signatures that looked like a clumsy, rushed imitation of my handwriting. Then, I opened a digital marketing brochure hidden deep within one of Wade's intercepted email threads. My breath hitched in my throat. Right there, on page 4, was a high-resolution photograph of my beautiful wraparound stone porch. The caption beneath it did not list my address. It read, Model Cottage A for the upcoming Mercer Heritage Retreat. They were actively using the actual, lived-in structure of my home as promotional material to solicit early investor capital, pretending it was a newly built prototype for their luxury expansion. They were selling shares of my living room to wealthy investors across state lines, the puzzle pieces locked together with sickening precision. I ran a quick corporate registry search on Redbriar Holdings, the name I had spotted on the demolition foreman's dispatch slip earlier that afternoon. It was a classic shell company, registered to a phantom agent in a completely different state. It existed solely to receive the massive construction loan disbursements from the banks. Once the bank wired the funds to Red Briar Holdings, the money was being aggressively washed through multiple accounts to pay off the demolition contractors, masking the true origin of the funds and completely hiding Wade's direct involvement from the financial auditors. This was a highly coordinated conspiracy, and every member of my family had left their fingerprints right on the glass. I pulled up the digitized loan applications and zoomed in on the witness acknowledgement sections. The elegant, looping signature verifying my forged signature belonged unmistakably to my mother, Celeste. She had personally attested to my consent in front of a compromised notary. I flipped to the attached construction budget adjustment notes. The margins were covered in aggressive blue ink, detailing kickbacks and inflated material costs. The handwriting and the distinct initials scrawled at the bottom of every page belonged to Travis. He was not just a bystander, he was actively managing the fraudulent ledgers. The sheer scale of their arrogance was breathtaking. I finally understood the desperate, frantic urgency behind the bulldozer. Commercial banks require routine site inspections before releasing the next multi-million-dollar tranche of loan funding. If an independent auditor or a bank inspector drove up the hill and found my house fully intact, beautifully maintained, and clearly occupied by me, the entire house of cards would collapse instantly. The storm damage claim would be exposed as a complete fabrication, and the venue expansion collateral would evaporate into thin air. The house had to vanish. They needed an empty, freshly churned plot of dirt to point to when the inspector arrived. A blank canvas they could pass off as cleared land, ready for development, or a total loss from storm damage. I spent the next 4 hours meticulously compiling every shred of evidence. I matched the fraudulent loan parcel numbers to my original deed. I paired the demolition dispatch slips with the shell company registry. I highlighted Celeste's fraudulent witness signatures and Travis's budget manipulation notes. I bundled the emails, the digital brochures, and the high-definition video I had taken of Wade laughing in front of the excavator. I organized everything into chronological folders, creating an undeniable map of their criminal enterprise. I did not draft a cease and desist letter. I did not fill out a civil lawsuit complaint to file at the local county courthouse. Suing them locally would only give Wade the home field advantage he craved, allowing him to use his golf course connections to stall and suffocate the legal process. I was not interested in a lengthy civil dispute over property lines or a small financial settlement. I wanted the entire structure ripped out by its roots. Instead, I opened a highly secure, encrypted portal. I navigated to the official reporting system for the Federal Financial Fraud Task Force. This specialized division specifically handled complex commercial wire fraud, bank fraud, and multi-state money laundering operations. They did not care about local politics or who Wade played tennis with on the weekends. I attached the encrypted zip file containing the entire devastating dossier. I filled out the incident summary with surgical precision, outlining the exact federal statutes that had been violated, detailing the misuse of federally insured bank funds, and mapping the fraudulent manipulation of collateral assets. I took one last look at the submit button glowing on my screen. This was the absolute point of no return. Once this transmission went through the server, there would be no family mediation, no quiet settlements over holiday dinners, and no turning back. It would trigger a catastrophic, unstoppable chain reaction that would tear the Mercer legacy down to its studs. I pressed the button. The screen loaded for exactly 2 seconds before displaying a solid green confirmation checkmark. The federal government now had everything they needed. I closed the laptop, locked the heavy metal safe, and walked out into the cool night air. The retaliation had officially begun, and it was going to be much, much louder than a bulldozer. Exactly 48 hours after I uploaded the encrypted dossier to the federal portal, my burner phone vibrated on the passenger seat of my rental car, a blocked number. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and instructed me to drive to a dilapidated truck stop diner right off the interstate, 30 miles past the county line. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth at the back of the restaurant. The smell of burnt coffee and old grease hung heavy in the air. Sitting across from me were two men who blended perfectly into the drab surroundings. They introduced themselves as Agent Reynolds and Agent Pierce from the Financial Crimes Division. They did not wear windbreakers with bright yellow letters. They wore wrinkled button-down shirts and looked like men who had not slept a full 8 hours in several years. I reached into my leather tote and placed a thick black flash drive on the sticky Formica table. It contained everything: the pristine scans of my original deed, the unaltered property surveys, the downloaded email chains from my stepdad, the high-definition demolition video, and a painstakingly constructed timeline cross-referencing every single document. Agent Reynolds picked up the drive, turning it slowly between his thumb and index finger. "You do very thorough work," he said, his voice barely rising above the hum of the diner's refrigeration unit. "Most people panic when their property is destroyed. They call the local sheriff. They hire a loud civil attorney. They tip their hand. A local civil suit would take 5 years and end in a sealed settlement," I replied, keeping my hands perfectly still wrapped around my ceramic mug. "I am not interested in a settlement." Agent Pierce leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He had pale blue eyes that locked onto mine with absolute intensity. "Red Briar Holdings," he stated quietly. "The shell company you spotted on the demolition dispatch slip. You were entirely correct to flag it. That name has been bouncing around our system for the last 18 months. We have traced their dummy accounts through commercial real estate transactions in 3 different states. They act as a phantom clearinghouse, washing construction loans and funneling the clean cash back to the parent operators." I nodded, feeling a cold spike of validation. "They used it to pay the heavy machinery crew. They are trying to hide the money trail because the demolition itself is part of the fraud." "It is much worse than that," Reynolds corrected, pulling a small leather-bound notebook from his breast pocket. "When your stepfather ordered those machines to tear through your roof, he crossed a massive jurisdictional line. The loans he secured using your land as fake collateral were funded by institutions insured by the federal government. The money was moved via interstate wire transfers. The fraudulent applications were submitted through the mail. This is not a local zoning dispute anymore. It is wire fraud, mail fraud, and bank fraud." Pierce took over seamlessly. "And by physically destroying the house, they committed destruction of bank collateral. Because they knew the property was tied to those loan applications. Flattening it is legally considered tampering with evidence in an active federal investigation. They handed us a felony obstruction charge on a silver platter." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the gravity of their words settle in my chest. The machinery noise, the dust, my mother's mocking laughter, all of it had just been legally reclassified from a personal tragedy to a federal crime scene. "So, you arrest them," I said. "You have the forged notary seal. You have the shell company." Reynolds sighed, a harsh, tired sound. He tapped his notebook against the table. "It is not that simple. Men like Wade Mercer do not keep their ledgers in a cardboard box under the bed. They build fortresses. We have actually had the Mercer estate under active surveillance for the better part of a year." My heart skipped a beat. "You have been watching them?" "Closely," Pierce confirmed. "We knew they were inflating assets and running a highly sophisticated shell game, but knowing it and proving it in front of a federal judge are 2 entirely different animals. Wade operates through proxies. He uses his son to sign the dirty budgets. He uses your mother to witness the forged deeds. He keeps himself insulated. Up until you submitted this drive, we did not have the undeniable, smoking gun probable cause required to convince a federal magistrate to sign a dynamic entry search warrant for the main estate. We need to get inside his private server room and his physical document vault. That is where the master ledgers are kept. And now you have the cause," I pointed out, gesturing to the black flash drive. "We have the key," Reynolds corrected gently, "but we need him to open the door. If we raid the property right now based solely on the demolition, his legal team will file emergency injunctions, claim the servers are protected by attorney-client privilege, and tie us up in appellate court while they quietly incinerate the real evidence. We need to catch him holding the bag in front of the people he is stealing from." Pierce pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and slid it across the table. It was a glossy, high-end invitation printed on heavy cardstock. The elegant gold foil lettering announced a black-tie gala at the Mercer estate, scheduled for exactly 2 weeks from tonight. He is hosting a massive investor summit, Pierce explained, tapping the gold lettering. He is bringing in private equity managers from all over the East Coast. He is going to pitch them on the resort expansion, using the land he just stole from you as the crown jewel of the presentation. He needs their fresh capital to pay off the old loans before the banks realize the collateral is fake. It is a classic Ponzi structure. I stared at the invitation. The sheer arrogance of it was staggering. He was going to stand in his grand ballroom, drink expensive champagne, and sell a lie built over the crushed remains of my living room. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register. "We need you to play the victim," Reynolds said bluntly. "Right now, your family expects you to be a terrified, heartbroken woman who realizes she is entirely outgunned. We need you to lean into that. Do not threaten them with the police. Do not hire a lawyer. If they reach out to intimidate you, act intimidated. If they offer you a pathetic settlement to keep your mouth shut, act like you are seriously considering it. Make them comfortable," Pierce added. "Wade Mercer is a predator. When a predator thinks the prey has given up, they get sloppy. They stop checking their blind spots. We need him to feel absolutely invincible going into that gala. If he thinks you are neutralized, he will bring all the fraudulent ledgers, the shell company documents, and the fake appraisals right into the main house to show his top-tier investors behind closed doors. That is our strike window." I looked back and forth between the two agents. This was the pivot, the moment the script flipped completely. I was no longer a civilian seeking justice for a destroyed kitchen. I was an active, strategic asset in a federal sting operation. They were asking me to swallow my pride, to let my family believe they had broken me, all to set the final trap. A slow, cold smile crept onto my face. It was the first time I had smiled since I heard the diesel engines tearing through my roof. "I can be very quiet," I promised them softly. "I can be exactly the defeated daughter they want me to be." "Good," Reynolds said, finally allowing a grim fraction of a smile to show on his own face. "Keep your phone on you at all times. We will monitor their communications. When they reach out to offer you the gag order, play along. We are going to let them set the entire stage. And then, we are going to bring the curtain down." I stood up from the booth, leaving the black flash drive on the table between them. The diner felt different as I walked out. The air felt lighter. I stepped into the cool, dark parking lot, the gravel crunching under my boots. I had lost my physical house, but in return, I had gained the ultimate leverage. The impulsive, fiery desire to scream in Wade's face had completely evaporated, replaced by the chilling, calculating patience of a chess player who just realized she had forced a checkmate. I was perfectly willing to sit in the dark for the next 14 days. I would let Wade Mercer polish his glass, adjust his tuxedo, and smile for his wealthy guests. I would let him walk right into his own destruction. The heavy cream envelope arrived via private courier on a Tuesday morning. It bore the embossed crest of the most expensive corporate litigation firm in the state. Wade was not wasting any time. He wanted to lock the narrative down before the dust on my property had even fully settled. I opened the thick packet at the kitchen island of my temporary short-term rental and spread the documents out. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. The cover letter accused me of slandering the Mercer family business and threatened me with a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit if I spoke to the press, the county zoning board, or any local authorities. But the second page was where Wade showed his true hand. It was a settlement offer. He proposed a highly civilized solution to our little family misunderstanding. In exchange for my absolute silence, Wade offered to purchase a 2-bedroom condominium for me in the city limits, fully paid off. He also threw in a cash sum of $75,000 for my supposed emotional distress. There was, of course, a massive catch buried in the fine print. To receive the condo and the cash, I had to sign a retroactive waiver acknowledging that my destroyed house was structurally compromised and that the county condemnation order was entirely valid. I also had to sign a lifetime non-disclosure agreement. Wade was trying to buy his own federal immunity with a cheap city apartment and a gag order. I left the papers on the counter and poured myself a glass of water. My phone buzzed on the granite surface. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I answered, keeping my breathing slow and steady, remembering the federal agent's instructions to play the defeated victim. "Valerie," Celeste began, her voice trembling with a perfectly rehearsed sob. "Please tell me you received the courier. Wade is trying so hard to fix this, but you are pushing him. You are pushing our entire family to the brink. My house is gone, Mom," I said softly, injecting just enough exhaustion into my tone to sound entirely broken. The fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, metallic sharpness. "Oh, grow up," she snapped. "We are offering you a beautiful place in the city. You do not belong out here in the country anyway. Why are you dragging me into your mess if you try to fight Wade on this? If you refuse to sign that paperwork, I will personally see to it that you are completely disinherited. You will not see a single dime of the Mercer estate. I will cut you off from every holiday, every family event, every single relative. You will be dead to us." "I understand," I whispered. "Good. Sign the papers. Valerie, do not be stupid." The line went dead. She actually thought the threat of missing their toxic family dinners was leverage. I placed the phone down and opened my laptop. I navigated to Travis's public social media profile. He had just posted a new update 10 minutes ago. It was a glorious, high-resolution rendering of the new luxury layout. The caption read, "Mercer Lakeview Cottages opening soon. So proud to develop this family land into a premier destination." He was basking in the digital applause of his wealthy friends, acting as if the soil had belonged to him since birth. He was so drunk on his own ego that he was actively publishing photographic evidence of his financial motive before the legal dust had even cleared. As I took a screenshot of Travis's post for the federal file, my phone rang again. This time, the screen showed an unknown number. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. "Hello?" I said. "Listen to me, lady," a gruff, nervous voice muttered. The background noise sounded like a busy highway. I instantly recognized the raspy tone. It was the heavy-set foreman from the demolition site, the one who had asked Wade about the shell company payment on the day my house fell. "Who is this?" I asked, grabbing a pen. "Never mind my name." "I am calling from a burner," he said quickly. "I just saw the local rumors about your lot being tied up in a legal dispute. I do not want any part of a lawsuit. I am just a guy who drives machines. But your stepfather, he did something weird, and it is eating at my conscience." "What did he do?" I asked, my grip tightening on the pen. "When he hired our crew, he paid half the invoice through a standard wire, but he paid the other $25,000 in pure cash, handed it to me in a duffel bag." The foreman paused, taking a ragged breath. "He gave me a very specific, off-the-books instruction. He told me to take the heaviest excavator bucket and completely pulverize the concrete floor of your basement storage room. He wanted the dirt turned over 3 times. He stood there and watched me grind that specific corner of the foundation into dust." My blood ran completely cold, followed instantly by a rush of pure adrenaline. The basement storage room. That was exactly where I used to keep my heavy filing cabinets before I moved all my critical documents to the secure off-site climate-controlled vault years ago. Wade must have remembered seeing those cabinets. He actually believed the original, wet ink copies of his old financial transactions, the ones he had blindly emailed me to review months prior, were sitting in cardboard boxes in my basement. He ordered the foreman to crush the foundation because he was trying to physically destroy the paper trail. Wade thought he had permanently erased the evidence. He did not realize I had digitized and relocated everything. His frantic attempt to destroy the files only added a massive, undeniable layer of criminal intent to the federal case. "Thank you for telling me," I said. keeping my voice incredibly calm. "Can I ask you one more thing? Where did he hand you the cash? Was it at the downtown corporate office?" "No," the foreman replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He told me to meet him around back of the main mansion. There is a big, renovated carriage house near the tree line. I went inside to count the bills. Lady, that place is not a garage. It looks like a bank vault in there. I saw two massive steel safes and a whole wall of blinking computer servers. He pulled the cash right out of a floor safe." "The carriage house," I repeated softly. "Yeah, look, I am out. Do not call this number again." The line clicked and went silent. I sat back in my chair, staring at the blank wall of my rental apartment. The puzzle was finally, flawlessly complete. The federal agents had told me they needed Wade to open the door to his fortress. They needed to know exactly where the shadow ledgers, the shell company routing numbers, and the fake appraisals were physically stored. Wade had always maintained a pristine, perfectly legal corporate office downtown to satisfy standard municipal audits. But the real heartbeat of his criminal empire, the servers running the fraud, and the safes holding the illicit cash, were hidden mere yards from where he slept. He felt so untouchable on his own land that he kept his darkest secrets in the carriage house directly behind his mansion. He truly believed his estate was an impenetrable kingdom. I picked up the settlement offer, staring at the demand for my signature. I would not sign it, but I would certainly use it. I would string Wade along. I would tell his lawyers I needed a few days to review the terms. I would let him sleep soundly, convinced his stepdaughter had finally surrendered and that his basement demolition had successfully buried his past. The destruction of my home was meant to be his ultimate victory. But as I looked out the window of my rental, I realized the absolute poetry of his mistake. The final, devastating strike would not happen on the empty dirt where my house used to stand. It would happen right inside the carriage house Wade considered his safest sanctuary. He was building his future on stolen ground, completely unaware that I had just handed the federal government the exact coordinates of his destruction. Sitting in the dim light of my rental kitchen, I cross-referenced the shell company routing numbers Agent Pierce had provided with the digital ledger I had pulled from my stepfather's intercepted emails. The money flow did not just stop at the shell company that paid the demolition crew. The cash moved in a sophisticated, dizzying loop. It bled out of the main estate accounts, washed through the shell, and then funneled directly into a tax-exempt entity, the Mercer Heritage Foundation. A sickening wave of realization washed over me as I pulled up the public tax filings for the foundation. For the past 6 years, my family had hosted lavish charity dinners, soliciting massive donations for community revitalization. On paper, the foundation was dedicated to building resilience cottages and subsidized housing for disabled veterans. They were essentially asking for millions of dollars in philanthropic grants to build affordable homes. I opened the foundation's annual digital prospectus. There, on page 12, was the exact same photograph of my wraparound porch that I had seen in the commercial loan file. But the context here was infinitely more twisted. They had altered the address, changed the color of the front door using photo editing software, and labeled my home as Veteran Housing Project Alpha. My mother and stepfather were not just committing corporate bank fraud. They were actively exploiting the goodwill of charitable donors, using the physical structure of my house to steal millions of dollars meant for vulnerable veterans. The sheer moral bankruptcy of it elevated the crime from a dirty financial scheme to something utterly horrifying, but the facade was cracking. The pressure of maintaining such a colossal lie was beginning to fracture the family from the inside out. The evidence of their panic arrived unexpectedly on a Thursday afternoon. My phone vibrated with a text message from a blocked number. It was not the demolition foreman this time. It was a forwarded email chain, sent anonymously. I read the thread with a sharp intake of breath. A major philanthropic investor down in Florida had just wired a massive contribution to the foundation and was now aggressively demanding an in-person site tour of Project Alpha. He was flying up in 4 days. Wade was trapped. He could not show the Florida investor a functioning veteran home because it had never existed, and he could not show him the original structure because he had just paid a crew to grind it into dust. Scrolling further down the leaked email chain, I saw a frantic reply from Travis. My stepbrother, desperate to save his own skin, urged his father to throw the construction crew under the bus. Tell the investor the demolition company made a catastrophic geographical error, Travis wrote. We call it a tragic miscommunication. We sue the contractor for damages and buy ourselves 6 months to break ground on a new plot. It was a pathetic, scrambling lie. Travis wanted to blame a blue-collar foreman for flattening a fictional veteran home, completely forgetting that his own public social media timeline was currently flooded with digital renderings of luxury wedding cottages sitting on that exact same dirt. The federal agents already had screenshots of Travis bragging about his venue expansion. His own arrogance had destroyed their only viable alibi. Even my mother, who had spent her entire life pretending to be oblivious to Wade's financial dark arts, could feel the walls closing in. Through the local grapevine of country club gossips, I heard that Celeste had suddenly hired a private moving van in the middle of the night. She was quietly transferring her most expensive diamond jewelry, several inherited oil paintings, and her collection of vintage designer bags to a trusted friend's climate-controlled vault across town. She was attempting to hide liquid assets before a potential asset freeze. A woman who believes her husband is legally bulletproof does not smuggle her diamonds out the back door at 2 a.m. I was still analyzing the forwarded email chain when my phone rang again. This time, I recognized the incoming number. It belonged to Lena Cole. Lena had been the head bookkeeper for the Mercer estate for over 15 years. She was a quiet, fiercely intelligent woman who usually blended into the expensive wallpaper of the corporate office. I answered the call, keeping my voice neutral. I am not calling to offer you a settlement, Lena whispered immediately. Her voice was trembling, tight with absolute terror. I am calling because I'm about to be framed, and you are the only person who understands how the title documents actually work. Slow down, Lena. Framed for what? I asked. Wade just ordered me to sign a stack of retroactive transfer authorizations, she breathed, the sound of a locking door echoing faintly in the background. He is trying to backdate the charity funds. He wants it to look like I unilaterally moved the veteran grants into the shell company accounts without his authorization. He is setting me up as the rogue accountant. He is going to hand me over to the auditors to save himself. My grip on the phone tightened. Do not sign anything, Lena. Do not put your ink on those pages. I have not, she said, her voice cracking. But he is getting desperate. The Florida investor is breathing down his neck. The banks are asking for updated property appraisals. Wade is terrified. He thinks he destroyed the only paper trail when he crushed your basement. He does not know I kept a parallel set of books. I sat up straight, the blood rushing in my ears. The foreman had mentioned the carriage house, but Lena was the one who actually managed the data. Where are the master ledgers, Lena? The unedited files, the real grant applications? They are not in the carriage house, Lena revealed, dropping a massive piece of intelligence right into my lap. The carriage house is just the cash drop, and the dummy servers used to trick the municipal tax auditors. The real network, the original ledgers with Wade's digital signatures and the fake charity invoices, are physically isolated. They are on a standalone server rack hidden in a reinforced room directly behind the main wine cellar in the mansion. A hidden server room, I repeated, committing the layout to memory. Yes, and it is entirely off the grid. You cannot hack it from the outside, Lena explained, her breathing ragged. The system is on a physical timer lock. Wade only opens the biometric door to that specific room during major financial events, when he needs to quickly shift massive amounts of liquidity to show proof of funds to high-tier investors. He pulls the real numbers, flashes them on a secure tablet, and then locks the room back down. Like the upcoming black tie investor gala, I said softly, the entire federal strategy suddenly snapping into perfect focus. Exactly, Lena confirmed. The server room will be unlocked and running from 7 o'clock in the evening until midnight on the night of the gala. The ledgers will be exposed. If you are going to do something, if you are going to drop the hammer on him, That is the only window you will ever get. I need you to stay calm, I told her, my tone dropping into the authoritative, icy cadence of a risk analyst taking control of a catastrophic liability. Go to work. Nod your head. Tell Wade you need 48 hours to review the backdated authorizations before you sign them. Buy us time. And Lena. Thank you. I hung up the phone and immediately dialed Agent Reynolds. As the phone rang, I looked out the window of my rental apartment. The pieces of the chessboard were no longer just moving. They were locking into their final positions. Wade had built a kingdom on the illusion of charity and the destruction of my home. He thought the upcoming gala would be his ultimate triumph, a glittering evening where he could charm wealthy investors, secure millions in fresh capital, and bury his crimes under the clinking of expensive champagne glasses. But thanks to Lena, I now knew the truth. The gala was not a victory lap. It was the only night of the year when the impenetrable vault behind the wine cellar would be wide open. It was the exact moment when the counterfeit ledgers, the stolen charity funds, and the fraudulent loan documents would all be sitting on an active, unsecured server. The federal agents did not just have a motive anymore, they had a precise, 5-hour operational window. Wade Mercer was going to throw the most expensive party of his life, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just invited his own executioners right through the front door. It took exactly 4 minutes on a Tuesday morning to convince Wade's lead counsel that my spirit was entirely broken. I called their pristine corporate office and kept my voice wavering, hesitant, and perfectly calibrated to sound like a defeated woman. I told the lawyer I was exhausted by the relentless fighting. I said I was ready to accept the condominium and sign the non-disclosure agreement, but I insisted on one final condition. I wanted to look my stepfather in the eye and finalize our family settlement like civil adults. I specifically requested an invitation to the Black Tie Investor Gala that weekend, framing it as my need for closure. Wade took the bait instantly. For a narcissist of his caliber, having me surrender quietly in a sterile legal office was never enough. He craved a public capitulation. He wanted to parade me around his grand ballroom in front of his high-net-worth investors as living proof that the minor land dispute was entirely resolved. He intended to display me as the jealous, overly emotional stepdaughter who had finally come to her senses and bowed to the patriarch. When I arrived at the estate on the night of the gala, I did not look like a victim. I bypassed the sequined gowns and heavy diamond necklaces that my mother's social circle favored. Instead, I wore a tailored, floor-length gown in deep charcoal silk. It had long sleeves, a high, structured neckline, and absolutely zero embellishments. My hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek twist. I wore no jewelry, save for a simple silver watch. As I handed the keys of my cheap rental sedan to a white-gloved valet and walked up the sweeping marble steps of the mansion, I knew exactly how I appeared. I looked like a blade sheathed in dark fabric. Unassuming, quiet, and completely lethal, the grand ballroom was a masterpiece of stolen wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over hundreds of guests. A string quartet played softly in the corner, entirely drowned out by the arrogant laughter of private equity managers and commercial real estate developers. Waiters moved seamlessly through the crowd, balancing silver trays of vintage champagne flutes and intricate hors d'oeuvres. Wade stood at the center of the room, holding court. He wore a custom tuxedo that probably cost more than my first vehicle. When he saw me enter, a smug, victorious sneer flashed across his face. He actually raised his glass in my direction, a silent, mocking salute to my supposed surrender. I walked over to the edge of the gathering, accepting a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. I did not mingle. I did not make small talk with the local elite. I simply stood still and watched the room. I was waiting for the exact right moment to tighten the invisible noose. It happened just past 8 o'clock. Wade tapped a silver spoon against his crystal flute, demanding the room's absolute attention. The low hum of wealthy conversation faded into expectant silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed partners, and cherished friends," Wade boomed, his voice resonating with practiced political charisma. We are gathered tonight to celebrate the dawn of a magnificent new era for the Mercer Heritage brand. To build a true, lasting legacy, we must be willing to evolve. Sometimes, that means having the courage to clear away the stagnant, dead assets that anchor us to the past, making room for a profitable future. He looked directly at me when he said the words, dead assets. A few guests who knew the local gossip turned their heads to gauge my reaction, waiting for me to crumble or cry. I gave them nothing but a placid, unblinking stare. And speaking of that magnificent future, Wade continued, gesturing broadly to his right, I want my brilliant son, Travis, to show you exactly what your investments are building. Travis stepped forward, looking flushed and dangerously overconfident. He pulled a heavy velvet cloth off a massive table in the center of the room, revealing a highly detailed, illuminated architectural model. It was a perfect miniature reproduction of the luxury guest cottages, complete with tiny cobblestone driveways and ambient lighting, and it was sitting squarely on a piece of topography that belonged entirely to my legal name. The wealthy investor from Florida, a sharp-eyed man in a tailored navy suit, leaned in to inspect the model. It is a beautiful layout, Travis, but how quickly can you actually break ground? My firm is looking for rapid deployment of capital. We do not want our funds tied up in zoning red tape for a year. Travis puffed out his chest, completely oblivious to the massive trap he was stepping into. We are ready to pour concrete next week. We already leveled the old, unsafe structure that was blocking the view just a few days ago. Honestly, I have had this entire vision locked in, contractors booked, and deposits paid for over 6 months. We just had to wait for the physical clearing. The Florida investor nodded, impressed by the aggressive timeline. But I stepped forward, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. The crowd naturally parted for me, sensing a shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. That is incredibly efficient. Travis, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the quiet space. It was not loud, but it possessed a strange, resonant authority that immediately drew the attention of every heavy hitter in the circle. Travis froze, his smile faltering slightly as he looked at his father for guidance. Wade's jaw tightened, but he maintained his polite facade, trapped by his own captive audience. I am just curious about the logistics, I continued, turning my gaze to the Florida investor, offering him a polite, professional smile. As a title risk analyst, I always marvel at how quickly county municipalities move when the paperwork is flawless. Tell me, Travis, which specific condemnation order did the county use to expedite the clearing so perfectly? And who was the notary on that official filing? Was it Richard Vance? The name hung in the air like a drop of poison in a clean glass of water. Wade's eyes widened by a fraction of a millimeter. He knew exactly what that name meant. And Wade? I pivoted smoothly, not giving them a single second to recover or interrupt. The funding model is truly fascinating. Did the initial clearing capital come through Red Briar Holdings, or was it a direct draw from the Heritage Foundation? I only ask because I noticed the charity prospectus you sent to the Florida group featured the exact same structural footprint as the old house before it was demolished. It is a brilliant, creative way to recycle assets. The temperature in the grand hall plummeted. The Florida investor stood up straight, his expression instantly transforming from mildly impressed to deeply suspicious. In the world of high finance, words like notary discrepancies, shell companies, and recycled charity assets are the ultimate, terrifying red flags. Smart money runs at the very first scent of institutional fraud. What is she talking about? Wade, the Florida investor asked, his tone dropping a full octave. Are the foundation grants crossing over into your commercial holding accounts? Before Wade could formulate a smooth, charming lie to deflect the heat, my mother shattered the remaining illusion. Celeste pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her face flushed with champagne and pure, unadulterated panic. She had never been equipped to handle public pressure. "Stop it right now," Celeste hissed, her voice shrill and desperate, completely abandoning her refined country club persona. "Do not listen to her. She is just bitter and confused. It is just internal family paperwork. There is absolutely no need to drag lawyers and legal technicalities into a celebration. We handled it privately. It is our land. It was the worst possible thing she could have ever said. She did not fiercely deny the allegations of fraud. She simply pleaded that their fabricated paperwork should remain a private family matter immune to legal scrutiny. The room went completely dead silent. The surrounding investors exchanged dark, guarded glances. You could practically hear the sound of heavy checkbooks snapping shut. I did not argue with my mother. I did not raise my voice or defend my accusations. I simply offered her a cold, pitying look and took a slow step back from the glowing architectural model. I had planted the explosive right in the center of the room. I did not need to stand around to watch the financial shrapnel fly. As Wade frantically tried to corral the furious Florida investor into a private study to do immediate damage control, I let my eyes drift toward the back of the grand hall. Standing near the heavy oak doors leading to the kitchen corridors was Lena. She was dressed in a standard black catering uniform, holding a silver serving tray tightly against her chest. I caught her eye across the sea of panicked elites. Lena gave me a single, distinct nod. She then reached up and deliberately adjusted the collar of her shirt with 2 fingers. It was the prearranged signal. She had just returned from the hidden corridor. The biometric lock on the server room behind the wine cellar was currently disengaged. Wade had opened it an hour before the party to verify the fake ledgers for his high-level pitch meetings, and it was still actively running. The physical binders of forged deeds were sitting out on the mahogany desk. The auxiliary safes in the carriage house were unlocked. Every single piece of damning evidence the federal government needed was currently sitting completely exposed, breathing the open air of the estate. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, my heart beating in a steady, victorious rhythm. The final puzzle piece had just snapped into place. The board was perfectly set. Wade Mercer was desperately trying to save a multi-million-dollar illusion in his grand ballroom, completely unaware that the only thing left for him to do was wait for the flashing lights to tear through the darkness. The silence in the grand ballroom was no longer merely awkward, it was actively hostile. The Florida investor was already backing away, but the true killing blow came from an older, aggressively sharp woman standing near the elaborate ice sculpture. She was a senior partner at a Chicago private equity firm, known for dismantling corporate frauds. She reached into her evening bag and pulled out the thick, glossy Mercer Heritage prospectus they had mailed her earlier that month. "Wade," the Chicago investor said, her voice cutting through the quiet room like a surgical blade, "I am looking at page 14 of your investment packet. The flagship Resilience Cottage you claimed was fully completed using the Veteran Housing Grant. The architecture is highly distinct. It features a wraparound stone porch, custom oak framing, and a very specific bay window layout." She lowered the booklet, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "It is an exact, indisputable structural match to the private residence your stepdaughter just stated was demolished on Tuesday. Why are you soliciting our capital for a completed charity project using a photograph of a house you just illegally crushed?" The collective reaction from the surrounding elite was visceral. You could practically feel the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. High net worth individuals do not tolerate being treated like fools, and they certainly do not tolerate having their money tied to fabricated assets. Wade lost his polished facade entirely. His face turned a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. He abandoned his audience, lunging forward and wrapping his fingers around my upper arm with a bruising, desperate force. "Excuse us for a brief moment," Wade barked at the crowd, his voice tight and breathless. "A minor family misunderstanding that I will clear up right now." He dragged me out of the ballroom, his expensive leather shoes slipping slightly on the polished marble floors. He pulled me down the main corridor and shoved me through the heavy mahogany doors of his private study, slamming them shut behind us. The sound of the string quartet was instantly muffled. Wade stormed over to his massive oak desk. His hands were actually shaking. He yanked open the top drawer and pulled out the thick legal packet his lawyers had sent me. He slammed a heavy gold pen down on top of the settlement agreement. "Sign it," Wade ordered, his chest heaving. The charming patriarch was dead, replaced by a cornered, terrified animal. Sign the family settlement right this second. Take the city condominium. Take the $75,000. I do not care. Just put your name on the signature line so I can walk back out there, wave this document in their faces, and prove that everything is legally resolved. I stood perfectly still in the center of the plush Persian rug. I did not look at the pen. I looked directly into his panicked eyes. I am not signing anything, Wade, I replied, my voice carrying the steady, chilling cadence of a judge reading a final verdict. Are you insane? He shouted, slamming his fist against the wood. Do you realize what you are doing? You are sinking the entire estate over a stubborn grudge. If those investors pull their funding tonight, the commercial loans default next week. We will lose everything. You already lost everything, I corrected him smoothly. I did not come here tonight to negotiate a real estate deal. I did not come for your dirty money. I came here to stand in this room and watch exactly how many more lies you could force out of your mouth before the entire wall behind you collapsed. Wade stared at me, the blood draining completely from his face as the absolute finality of my words registered in his brain. He realized, far too late, that he possessed absolutely zero leverage. I turned my back on him and walked out of the study, leaving him alone with his worthless contracts. As I stepped back into the dimly lit hallway, the sheer panic of the evening had already begun to infect the rest of the family. The orchestrated unity of the Mercer Empire was violently ripping apart. Everyone was suddenly fighting for their own survival, moving silently toward the rear of the mansion. I spotted Travis. He was backed into a darkened alcove near the coat check room, entirely separated from his wealthy guests. He had a phone pressed hard against his ear. His complexion was chalky, his eyes wide with unadulterated terror. What do you mean, federal agents visited your office? Travis hissed into the receiver, his voice cracking with panic. You promised my father the digital seal was completely untraceable. You said it was a localized county matter. He listened for another 2 seconds before his knees visibly buckled. The county official on the other end of the line was clearly flipping, trading his loyalty to the Mercers for a federal plea deal. Travis dropped his champagne flute. The crystal shattered against the baseboards, but he did not even flinch. He ended the call and sprinted frantically toward the service corridor. I watched as he yanked open a hidden side drawer near the security keypad, grabbing a thick backup hard drive and a set of heavy car keys. The golden boy of the Mercer family was not going to stay and fight the federal government. He was planning to run into the night, abandoning his father to take the massive legal impact. I continued walking down the corridor, the air growing heavy with the metallic scent of burning ozone and heated metal. The smell was coming from the clerical suite nestled near the basement stairwell. The heavy wooden door was cracked open just an inch. Inside the windowless room, my mother was violently dismantling her own legacy. Celeste had abandoned her elegant posture and her socialite grace. She was on her knees, desperately hauling massive accounting binders out of the lower cabinets. An industrial-grade paper shredder sat in the corner of the room, its motor whining fiercely as it chewed through thick stacks of paper. Celeste was furiously feeding the charity fund tax receipts, the shell company routing slips, and the fake construction invoices straight into the steel teeth. She was sobbing, her diamond earrings shaking as she tried to manually erase years of systemic money laundering. She truly believed that turning the ledgers into confetti would somehow stop the avalanche that was already crashing down on the roof. It was a pathetic, useless gesture. She was destroying physical copies of files the federal government had already perfectly digitized and verified. I did not interrupt her. Let her ruin her evening gown with printer ink and paper dust. Further down the hall, standing in the shadows near the catering exit, was Lena. She had stripped off her serving apron and was holding her purse tightly against her side. She looked at me, her face pale but resolute. We did not need to exchange a single word. Lena reached out and firmly unlatched the heavy deadbolt on the exterior service door. She pushed the reinforced steel frame open, propping it ajar with a small wooden doorstop. It was the exact direct access point the tactical teams needed to bypass the main security system and flood straight into the hidden wine cellar and the active server room. Her part was done. Lena slipped quietly out into the dark gardens, leaving the sinking ship behind. The air inside the mansion was suffocating, thick with betrayal, shredded paper, and ruined futures. I needed to breathe. I walked up the grand sweeping staircase, ignoring the confused murmurs of the investors still arguing in the ballroom below. I moved through the dark, opulent master suite and pushed open the massive French doors leading out to the rear balcony. The cool, crisp Tennessee night air hit my face, clearing the stench of Wade's panic from my lungs. I walked to the stone railing and looked out over the sprawling, manicured acreage of the Mercer estate. The property was completely silent, blanketed in total darkness. Then, at the very edge of the property line, exactly 2 miles down the winding private driveway, a flash of movement caught my eye. There were no sirens. There were no loud announcements. But the darkness was suddenly pierced by a tight, incredibly fast-moving convoy of headlights. 5 heavy, unmarked black sport utility vehicles were tearing up the asphalt, moving in perfect aggressive synchronization. They did not slow down as they approached the front gates. The vehicles were accelerating, carrying heavily armed tactical teams, forensic accountants, and federal warrants straight into the heart of Wade Mercer's fortress. I rested my hands on the cold stone of the balcony and watched the headlights cut through the trees. My destroyed home was a tragedy, but this was absolute poetry. The bill had finally come due, and it was arriving exactly on schedule. I stepped back inside from the cold balcony, the heavy French doors clicking shut behind me. I had barely made it to the top of the grand staircase when Wade intercepted me. He had followed me up from the lower level, his face slick with a frantic, greasy sweat. He grabbed my wrist, his grip painfully tight. "You are coming back down to the study right now," he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. "You are going to sign that family settlement if I have to physically force the pen into your hand." Before I could even pry his fingers off my skin, the massive oak front doors of the mansion were blown wide open. The sound was deafening, a synchronized explosion of heavy boots and commanding voices. "Federal agents, nobody move. Hands where we can see them." Over a dozen men and women wearing dark tactical vests flooded into the grand foyer. The private security team, highly paid former military men who usually guarded the perimeter, were disarmed and neutralized in under 3 minutes. They were pushed face down onto the imported rugs before they could even reach for their radios. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Billionaires and private equity managers dropped their champagne flutes, pressing themselves against the silk wallpaper as the tactical teams secured the perimeter. Wade froze, his hand dropping from my wrist as if my skin had suddenly caught fire. He stared down at the foyer in absolute disbelief. Agent Reynolds and Agent Pierce walked through the shattered illusion of the Mercer Empire. They did not look like tired men in a diner anymore. They looked like the wrath of the federal government. Reynolds held up a thick sheaf of papers stamped with a heavy official seal. "Wade Mercer," Reynolds' voice boomed, cutting through the panicked murmurs of the elite crowd. "We are executing federal search and arrest warrants. You are being taken into custody on charges of multi-state financial fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery of property records, destruction of federally insured collateral, and tampering with evidence." Wade tried to swallow, his political charm completely vanishing. "This is an outrage," he stammered, his voice cracking. "This is a private event. You have absolutely no right to barge in here. I want my attorneys on the phone immediately." Pierce did not even blink. He simply turned to his tactical units and started issuing precise, devastating coordinates. "Team Alpha, secure the carriage house behind the main estate, specifically the floor safes. Team Bravo, take the service corridor down to the wine cellar. The biometric server room is currently unlocked and actively running. Team Charlie, clear the private study on the first floor." Wade died in that exact moment. I watched the arrogant light behind his eyes extinguish entirely. He stumbled backward, hitting the mahogany banister. He had always believed his sprawling property was an impenetrable fortress, a labyrinth that only he understood. Now, He was watching federal agents navigate his deepest secrets with the precision of a guided missile. The hits kept coming. The heavy service doors near the kitchen swung open, and two agents marched Travis into the main hall. His custom tuxedo was covered in dirt and horsehair. His hands were zip-tied tightly behind his back. One of the agents tossed a heavy backup hard drive and a cheap burner phone onto a nearby catering table. They had intercepted the Golden Boy right behind the equestrian stables, actively attempting to flee the jurisdiction with the digital evidence. Travis was sobbing, a pathetic, broken sound that completely shattered his arrogant developer persona. Any chance Wade had of claiming ignorance was destroyed by his own son's cowardly flight. A minute later, a female agent escorted my mother up from the basement clerical suite. Celeste looked entirely unrecognizable. Her flawless makeup was smeared with tears, and the front of her designer gown was coated in a fine layer of white paper dust. Her hands were stained black from printer ink. The agent trailing her was carrying a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside the bag were the half-mutilated pages my mother had frantically tried to destroy. Even through the plastic, the bright blue logo of the Charity Foundation and the bold numbers of the illicit wire transfers were clearly visible. She was caught literally red-handed, committing felony obstruction of justice next to a smoking industrial shredder, but the final, most humiliating blow was reserved for the grand ballroom. Agent Pierce walked directly past the terrified investors and stopped in front of a massive, antique oil painting hanging on the far wall. Without asking for permission, he pulled the heavy frame off the wall, revealing a large steel wall safe. Pierce turned to Wade, who was now being flanked by two armed agents. "Open it, Wade, or we bring in the heavy drills and completely destroy the wall." Wade's hands shook violently as he was marched forward, with hundreds of his wealthiest peers watching in absolute silence. He punched in the 6-digit code. The heavy steel door clicked and swung open. Pierce reached inside and began pulling out the physical architecture of Wade's crimes. He pulled out the master ledger books. He pulled out the heavy plastic bag containing the fake notary stamp. He pulled out the original shell company contracts. And finally, Pierce held up a thick, leather-bound folder. It was the master commitment letter to the private equity group, legally pledging the land under my destroyed home as guaranteed collateral. The investors watched in horror as the undeniable proof of a massive financial scheme was laid bare on a silver catering tray. As the agents moved in to read Wade his rights and secure the handcuffs around his wrists, he turned his head and looked up the staircase at me. There was no mocking smile. There was no patronizing lecture about family legacy. He just stared at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. He had thought flattening my $500,000 home would make me disappear. He thought he was burying a loose end. But he finally understood that the moment those diesel engines tore through my roof, he had handed me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle his entire life. My silence over the last 14 days was not surrender. It was the quiet, calculated patience of a hunter watching her prey walk directly into a trap. Within 24 hours, the entire Mercer estate was placed under federal lockdown. All corporate and personal assets were completely frozen and seized to serve a massive civil and criminal investigation. Without the stolen funds, the shell companies collapsed, and the banks instantly called in their loans. The empire was entirely eradicated. As for me, I did not just walk away. The federal courts moved swiftly to invalidate the forged condemnation orders. I regained full, undisputed legal ownership of my land. I received a massive financial restitution package from the liquidated estate assets, legally mandated to compensate for the criminal destruction of my property. A few years later, I stood on the exact same patch of dirt where Wade had laughed at me. The old stone house was gone, but in its place, the framework for a beautiful, modern, entirely new home was rising against the Tennessee sky. I did not rebuild it to prove a point to my family because I no longer had one. I built it as a permanent monument to a very specific truth. There are certain people in this world who will not scream, cry, or beg when they are deeply betrayed. They will simply take a step back, open a new case file, and stand perfectly still while they watch the traitor's empire get carried away in handcuffs. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please leave a comment letting me know where you are listening from so we can interact and share our thoughts together. And I invite you to subscribe to the Violet Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support me further by pressing the hype button so that the story in this video can be heard by many more people.